Hey there, friends. Hello. How are you? In order to set matters right, we have to go back to the beginning. And so what I'm doing here is an impossible attempt to bring the Bible and prophecy up to date with what we know since the birth and death of Jesus Christ. I'm just working on the history. Now, if you are on my Facebook timeline, you are seeing a chronology, okay? And that chronology, we're going to go through right now because it's based on a whole lot of work, and it's based on the astronomical calendar of how often Nibiru, the planet, visits our world on its 3,657-year orbit around the galaxy, and it makes 7 visits in each galactic year, which amounts to 25,772 years. And so Nibiru was here in around 450,000 years ago. The Anunnaki got here, and at that time Earth was occupied at Atlantis by survivors of the Lyran Wars, occupied at Lemuria in the South Pacific by indigenous brown people who came to gold mine. 400,000 years, the Anunnaki began gold mining in South Africa. 300,000 years, Quetzalcoatl organized gold mining in South America. 208,000 years ago, Ningishita and Enki genetically altered the Neanderthal Northern European male children in a tropical Eden. They altered the Neanderthals to keep them small, but make them smarter. 100,000 years ago, the Anunnaki ruled Syria and South Africa as a monarchy. Remember, each precession of the equinoxes comprises 7 Nibiru orbits. So let's look at the last 7 Nibiru orbits. 22 to 20,000 years ago, Atlantis was frozen out of the North Pole by an ice age, and migration south began. Lemuria was gone. The migration south was going into Siberia and North America. 19 to 18,000 BC, Nibiru brought stone spheres that destroyed Atlantis, and the age of stone megaliths was in as a work. Between 15 and 16,000 years ago, humanity burrowed underground on all continents due to stone hail and the fear of giants. 12 to 11,000 years ago, Noah's flood wiped out billions of people, including Nephilim, and raised the sea level by 30 meters. 10,000 BC, dozens of stone pyramids under construction around the equatorial belt were put underwater. 8,000 BC, there was a flood. 5,000 BC, there was a flood. And about 1600 BC, there was a flood. Okay, so Nibiru, 1600 BC plus 2,000 years is 3,600. Nibiru is back now. Okay, we've got that straight. So what happened in the intervening time? Now, the Bible says, according to Hebrew chronology, that Jesus was born in 33 BC. But that's not what the Colburn Bible says. The Colburn Bible has a different date. Okay, chapter 2 of the Colburn. This is the true record of events concerning Jesus, son of Joseph and Mary, which we have received by the hands of several who have lived within the circle of his light, and more especially from one who was our earthly father in the faith. He being not the least among the articulate ones who knew Jesus, and a person of no mean estate, Joseph Arimathea is who I believe he's referring to, both in the distant land from whence Jesus came and in this more virile land. For Jesus came to fulfill the desires and longings of men expressed in certain holy books, but more so in many unlettered hearts. For it is written that such is the nature of things. The tree springing from the yearning of men shall not fail to bear fruit. For the holy books can be likened to an egg containing the embryonic hopes and desires of men. In the sacred books of the Edwin it is written, the Son of Man is the shepherd of men, and we know how diligently a shepherd tends his flocks. Jesus came not as a shepherd to drive, but as one bearing a guiding lantern to show the way. It is also written, the Son of Man is the deliverer of men, and while we know from what we have to be delivered, those who lived in his land misunderstood the meaning. From the book of the holy Mark, whose wife was one of our own fair race, her father being a Roman waykeeper, whose wife was barren, and having this home-born lady, her mother, as a slave, had by her a child whom he later adopted and raised as a lady of estate. We learn much, but clearer to our understanding is that knowledge concerning Iliad imparted to us by our earthly father. Aristolus taught that Iliad had been one who commanded with the ships of Rome, but was not without ships himself. So it was that when Jesus went down to the western sea of the Jews, which is not the sea of the setting sun, he being one skilled with his hands worked on them. Jesus was brawny built and not one to take money without labor. Jesus, our master, light of our life, was hung on the shameful cross in his 27th year, this being the 1099th year of Britain, in the reign of Tiberius, ruler of the Roman lands to the east. Within a year, Iliad and others departed from their homeland shore by ship, and though this was demasked in a heavy storm, it made safe haven in Sankel. There he and his son were joined by several other holy persons. They tarried a while before crossing to Laidlow, from whence they took a ship to Tarsus. Tarsus, that strikes a familiar note. In the year of Britain 1112, our father came from Rome with others because of the decrees of Claudius, ruler of all Romans to the east. where the true light could burn undisturbed, but the circle of Roman might spread ever wider like a thrown fisherman's net. 13 years after our Master was hung on the cross, the Romans came to the fair land of Britain, and the might of their legions prevailed over the brave Caridus, great battle king of all the Britons. He was leader of fighting men such as will not be seen again. He was carried off, betrayed by an irrational woman, an honorable peace offering to appease the argument of might, together with the British fount of knowledge and wisdom. With him went the all-wise Fran, being held in honorable captivity until returned to the land of light at the intercession of our Father, for those whom he befriended had not forgotten him. For Eliot sought that the greatest wrong men can commit against man is the betrayal of a friend. Now the daughter of Caridus was Gladys, red-haired, blue-eyed, and slim, who married Pudens, commander of the legions, beloved of Paul, the martyred in God, who fled in the 1130 year of Britain. Lean, son of Caridus, brother of Gladys, being the first Christian in Rome. See, this is the same story as in Scripture, only the timeline's different. In the year of Britain 1127, there was a great outbreak of fighting, and many men sought refuge within the enclosure of Iliad, for the free Britons had risen, having been given an assurance of victory by no less than the battle goddess herself. Calling on Amarath and Camelos, the Briton followed their battle queen, whose heart was afire because of the rape of her daughters. She stood tall in stature and was serene of face, speaking deep but melodiously. She knew the mastery of letters and spoke 3 tongues. She had fair hair hanging to her hips when not in battle gird. Her head was circled by a golden war coronet, and her tunic was of green and brown, interwoven in the manner of men. She wore a short cloak of purple. Thus she spoke before the battle. I speak to you as a woman whose house has been violated and her daughters dishonored. We have been dealt with unjustly, and I appeal to you not only as a queen, but more so as a woman. Britons who honor their women folk cannot regard this lightly. Unlike the squirming Roman Nerotes, I do not rule over servile and docile unmanly men who are less than men, nor like he who rules over peddlers and hucksters. Nor am I like the cowardly man-woman, Nero, who surrounds himself with perverts and half-men and slaves who satisfy obscene desires. Such is the nature of the vile culture whose foreigners have introduced to our fair land. And that is the Colburn Bible. And that year was 1100. And so Jesus lived only 1,000 years ago. And he was up in Britain because the Crusades were raging around the Middle East. Okay, and he was a boat builder, and he was pacifist, and he didn't get involved in the Crusades. Okay, so only 200 years later, Constantine, the Roman emperor, converted, if you want to use that word loosely, to the Christian religion. But what he did was introduce all of the Babylonian traditions into the church. And the main change was that the church no longer saw its behavior and its ethos and its relationships as primary, but it began to see ideas and doctrines and dogmas as primary, witness the Council of Nicaea in 1325, and the Council of Trent in 1545, during which time the church began warring against its own members who were not in compliance, being politically correct enough. And they did this because they had encompassed the imperial mentality of Constantine. Okay? So the imperial mentality of ideology, top-down, secular materialist metaphysics, sacred geometry, numerology, astrology, was introduced into the British people, which of course many of the Druids followed. Okay. But the Babylonian occult tradition was carried by Rome, was carried by Tartary, which came down in 1847 in a massive Armageddon, and is carried today, even some of its doctrines, by Islam. And so that's the background that we come to only 400 years later. Okay, and I missed something. Okay, let me get this straight. Elizabeth I inherited a treaty by Pope Innocent in 1403 or 1304, in which he claimed to own all of the souls on the planet. Okay. And so when her British Navy defeated the Spanish Armada protecting the Pope in 1588, scholars believed that she had taken over possession of all the sons on the planet, all the souls on the planet from the Pope. And so the laws that governed that conquest, maritime admiralty law, became laws over all the souls on the planet. And that's why the British Navy began organizing the rest of the world under maritime admiralty corporate statutes. Okay, that's going into the 1600s, when there was the 1600s, I believe, is when there was a civil war in England. The 1700s, when George III presided over the colonies, and the colonies said, no more, we've had enough of that. So in 1812, there was a war between England and the United States, which the United States believed they won, but because of the banking arrangements that existed between England and the colonies were still subject to the crown. Okay, so let's start looking at who became the prophets of Christianity after the War of 1812. Who was informing the Christian people of their obligations? All right. I'll start with, well, let's see. Okay, we're finished with this. I'll start with this, the 10 tribes. In the first place, who are the Brits anyway? Who are the British to be claiming that they own all the souls on the planet and that they are the keepers of the covenant and the laws of God. Well, here we go. Get a copy of this book. Okay, the tribes, Israelite origins of Western peoples. And what you find out from this book is that Britain was Hebrew. Okay, Gaelic is syntactically related to Hebrew and Egyptian. All right, so is Welsh. So Brits are Hebrews. And I want you to watch the video I have listed here at the top about the coronation stone of destiny, how the Hebrew covenant got to Britain in the first place. Okay, in the Hebrew chronology, the date for the prophet Zechariah to take King Zephaniah's 2 daughters to Tara, Cork County, Ireland, in the Hebrew, it was 583 BC. But according to the chronology of the Cauldron, that would have been the year 492 AD, which was about 600 years before the birth of Jesus Christ. Okay, about the year 500. The Hebrews brought their royal line to Tara, Cork County, Ireland. All right, and you watch that video and you'll see what happened. Okay, so then for the next, about 500, for the next 700 years, a line of kings was in Ireland, and then St. Patrick drove Columbo out of Ireland. He went to Scotland, all right, and settled a monastery in Scotland. And then in 1296, Edward I brought the stone of Scone down to London and sat upon it for his coronation as Edward I the Confessor. And he was a very devout Christian man. He was a good guy. He was okay. Well, they were still battling in those days. All right. So that was in 1296. All right. And then in the 1300s down in Rome, they began prosecuting the Inquisition. Okay. And so there was a lot going on in Rome while Edward I was becoming king in Britain. All right. So, and since the 1300s, the 14th century, the Roman Church was dividing over ideas, particularly the Trinity, which I really get a kick out of. That was the first dogma that I wondered about, because can you imagine? Suppose I had an organization, and in order to belong to my organization, you had to be able to recite my relationship to my son and my father. You had to be able to get that right, or I was going to kill you. Well, that's the equivalent of the Inquisition. The Babylonian style church was demanding that followers, that adherents, that convert, the people converted into the Christian religion, be able to recite those relationships in order to be continue part of the church. And if reading the Bible, which they really discouraged it as long as they could, people got the idea that the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost were different personalities. How could they be equal? Those people were murdered. Those people were murdered. All right. And so that's the fight that was going on when I walked into the Presbyterian Church in 1963 and asked the pastor, what is this about the Trinity? And the pastor stood up and he said, this is a holy place, woman, get out. We don't question that. Whoa, that was 1963. That got me thinking, that really got me thinking. All right. So then, okay, George III presided over the oops. Excuse me, the colonies, and he was essentially finally succeeded by Queen Victoria. All right. But in the meantime, the Europeans were not happy about the claim made by the people in the colonies that they wanted to be able to negotiate their own deal. They didn't want to just have to be spoon-fed the deal coming down from the Vatican. And so the next thing we're going to look at is the Verona Treaty, 1822. The secret treaty of Verona, Verona. Okay, and I'm going to read you some of its terms and conditions, and you're going to see why people were freaking out in Europe who wanted to have a free mind, and they were taking the chance and getting on a ship to get the bleep out of Europe, who were Anabaptists, Mennonites, Amish, and other sects that simply weren't going along with the Babylonian BS coming from the Vatican that was all about the conformity to politically correct thinking, which is exactly what we have going on right now. Okay, Article 1 of the Secret Treaty of Verona. The high contracting powers, being convinced that the system of representing government is equally as incompatible with the monarchical principles as the maximum of the sovereignty of the people with divine right, engage mutually in the most solemn manner to use all their efforts to put an end to the system of representative governments in whatever country it may exist in Europe, and to prevent its being introduced into those countries where it is not yet known. As it cannot be doubted that the liberty of the press is the most powerful means used by the pretended supporters of the rights of nations to the detriment of those princes, the high contracting parties promise reciprocally to adopt all proper measures to suppress it, not only in their own states, but also in the rest of Europe. Article 3. Convinced that the principles of religion contribute most powerfully to keep nations in the state of passive obedience, which they owe to their princes, the high contracting parties declare it to be their intention to sustain in their respective states those measures which the clergy may adopt with the aim of ameliorating their own interests so intimately connected with the preservation of the authority of the princes, and the contracting powers join in offering their thanks to the Pope for what he has already done for them, and solicit his constant cooperation in views of submitting the nations. So in 1822, there is an effort by the Verona Treaty utilizing the Vatican, the chivalric orders, and the newly formed Masonic order, which was formed in 1776, okay, to undo the movement toward representative and democratic control by the peoples themselves. All right? And we know that move took because in 1834, the Congress of the United States passed the Indian Removal Act of 1834, which disenfranchised the Cherokee tribe and moved them in a death march from North Carolina to Oklahoma. And they did it legally. which says they used law to violate people's human and civil rights. Bingo. All right, now during the 19th century, there have been some surprising prophets. Emanuel Swedenborg, Ellen White, JosSmith, Pastor Russell, okay, and okay, those are the ones I'm going to look at. And what they were the very people that the Treaty of Verona was attempting to suppress. All right. So in 1830, JosSmith the prophet established his church, which sought to renew and restore lawful behavior in a new area that he called Zion, which was in Utah, okay? Zion was settled in Utah in 1847, and to this date, they have adopted the principles and practices of temple building and temple service and law-abiding life according to the teachings of Jesus Christ. They call it the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Okay, so JosSmith was a prophet that actually came forward with a denomination that restored a great deal of the commandments and laws and ordinances. And the Salt Lake City, Utah temple is called Zion. On another note, Ellen White, okay, was she was a prophetess who created the Seventh-day Adventist denomination that favors the Saturday Sabbath and vegetarianism, which is also a peace abiding. Okay. And Pastor Russell, who was a Mason and is interred in a Masonic gravesite in, I think it's New York State, restored and brought up the behaviors that Christians are expected to follow and adhere to, and teaches, his group, Jehovah's Witnesses, teach racial tolerance, cultural tolerance. All you have to do is follow the scriptures in terms of behavior, and you can belong to them. And they do a lot of door-to-door preaching. So there's another prophet that has turned away from the Babylonian practices of the Vatican and the secular, materialist, occult, New Age practices of Baal and Moloch, and wherein, you know, that the sexual abuse of children, human trafficking, slavery, and all of that, secrecy, treachery, sedition, is all held as sacred in the ideology in which you have a two-headed eagle, and it looks in both directions. It looks to the right and it looks to doing what's good, but it also looks to doing what's evil and reprehensible and unjust, because it can, because it's an empire. It's an empire. All right, so these three sects of Christianity that returned to the doctrine of lawful behavior all violate the Verona Treaty of 1822, whereas The Vatican, and particularly the Church of England, have accepted and utilized and incorporated liturgy and doctrinal teachings as the only matter worth noting in their sense of worship. Okay. And of course, the Reformation of Martin Luther, which was intended to correct the behaviors of the Babylonian system. The Reformation has led to an increasingly permissive Christian church, following the 13 epistles of the Apostle Paul, which imply, it never really states it outwardly, that behavior doesn't matter. All you have to do is believe in Jesus and you're saved, and that's all there is to it. And that's why in the Reformed church, in the Protestant church, the women dress like worldly women, and they have worldly values and worldly morals and worldly ways of living, because they never embraced the law-abiding, peacekeeping, peacemaking practices of either the Anabaptists or of Jesus himself. They don't believe that our behavior has any particular outcome. It's all just what you're thinking. If you've got your Trinity correct and immortality of the soul, but you don't believe in reincarnation and you believe in Zionism, okay, all right, see what I'm saying? Okay, Zionism. I have a page here that's just really fascinating, and I'd never seen this before until I tried to pull all this together. And this is a real surprise to me. In Utah, Mormons call themselves Jews, and Jews are considered Gentiles. Salt Lake City is of particular interest to Jews, since it is perhaps the only place in the world where Christians call themselves Jews, and Jews are often called Gentiles. Salt Lake City is the headquarters of the evangelical Christian denomination, the unique Christian sect in America known as the Mormons. The full name of the sect is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It teaches that Jews are of Israel and God's chosen people. The Mormon sect believes that Jesus will eventually come to the Jews and claim them for his own, confounding any enemies they may still have. This denomination, founded in 1830, sent one of its leaders to Palestine many years ago, in 1840 to be exact, to dedicate that land to the gathering of the Jews, a movement in which they still firmly believe and are ready to assist at any time, at least to the extent of lending their moral support. To an Orthodox Mormon, the Nordic or any other race is not superior to the Jewish. This is the stand that Anthony Ivins, a member of the first presidency of the church, took in an interview with the present writer in the Nordic superiority question. Mr. Ivins, a cousin of Hubert Grant, the president of the church, said the fact that the Jews have been able to preserve their integrity as a race in the face of all obstacles was proof that they are racially inferior to nobody. The Mormon people regard themselves as of Israel too, if you please, and the term Israel as applying to themselves is frequently heard in their congregations. They believe themselves to be of Ephraim and cousins of the Jews who are of Judah. To a Mormon, those not of their faith are regarded as Gentiles. Gentiles in Utah often say, in a bantering way, that everybody in Utah outside of the Mormons is a Gentile, even the Jews. But the Mormons themselves would add, excepting the Jews, for as already pointed out, they regard the Jew in the same light that he regards himself, as of Israel, but of another branch of the faith. The Mormons hold Heber Grant, who is an insurance man by profession and interested in banks, sugar companies, office buildings, mercantile houses, hotels, and so forth, as a literal prophet of God, even as Abraham and Moses, and so on. Okay. So the Mormons consider that they are a branch of the Jews and that their temple comprises Zion. And they agree that the temple in the Mideast, in Palestine, is also Zion. Now, why did Zion leave Britain? Because that's where the stone of Scone, the pillow of the patriarch Jacob, was taken in 500 and finally taken to London, England in 1296, almost 1300, and where it is supposedly resides to this day. Okay, what happened to Zion in London or Edinburgh or wherever the British prophets afforded themselves residence? Well, it looks as if the Brits kicked Zion out. It looks as if the Church of England decided by its elites to back the Treaty of Verona of 1822 and to back the two Babylons, so that the colonies had to pick up the slack where the British elites, the British monarchy, had given up essentially on the Christian covenant. And we know that Queen Victoria, when after Albert died, she embraced the occult and used to have interminable seances trying to get back in touch with Albert, her husband. We know that King George V, she taught at her knee about a new empire that was going to take over, and George V took steps during his reign to make that empire come about and to reduce the British monarchy in its influence and the covenant in its influence to being non-essential. First thing George did was back the consolidation of banking around the Rothschilds, which meant that the laws in the Torah about how you finance your society were suspended, and he accepted usury as the correct way to finance anything. All right. And then he got England into the war, and he denied sanctuary to his first cousin, Tsar Nicholas, who was a very honest Christian man, and the Tsar and his family were annihilated. 1921, King George V founded and funded Tavistock, the Puzzle Palace, where they changed the ethos from the covenantal honesty and teachings of Jesus Christ into a puzzle palace of strategies intended to overwhelm and trick their enemies. And then 1925, George V countenanced and approved to the Kalergi plan to reorganize Europe by having massive immigration in the future come up from the south and resettle in Northern Europe, where all the civil Christian countries were. They wanted the empire mentality to return. And what returns with the empire mentality? Okay, pedophilia, pederasty, slavery, gun running, drug running, serial wars for conquest. That's what George was putting back to work. And my dad wasn't having it. My dad was not having it, all right? And the courtiers around George V were all of the mind that they wanted empire to return. And the contemporaries around my father were almost all annihilated in World War I. So my father stood alone against the elder generation of fascists in the UK. You see how things have really come full circle. They have come full circle. And so what we are facing with the New World Order is, it's just the Tartarian Empire, the Roman Empire, the Greek Empire. It's just the empire all over again with its ethos. And its ethos is commerce above everything. Commerce obliterated the tribes in North and South America when the explorers got here. Commerce drove the indigenous peoples of North America onto reservations and genocide. Commerce has created a technology, a computer technology running artificial intelligence built on binary digital theories. And binary digital theories cannot, do not, and will not ever capture either biology or human relationships. Can't happen, doesn't happen, won't happen. Because biology, by definition, is analog according to frequencies of precipitation and chemical interactions. They're all analog, all right? And human relationships, according to social functions, are not only analog, they sit on prime numbers, which can't be expressed in analog. So now human society is facing being dominated by artificial intelligence to the point where in China, they have social media, they have social scores that artificial intelligence calculates for each citizen who is face recognized on a camera, so they can penalize that person for some kind of social gaffe like jaywalking or throwing trash in the wrong place. Okay, the artificial intelligence computers are the dumbest robots that have ever been designed, and they're being placed above human choice and above interactions. This is business as usual. Transhumanism is jerking and messing with the DNA, the human genome, in order to make it commercially better. All right, commercially better. You need super soldiers to kill more quickly. Okay? You need super drugs to kill the disease right now. Never mind that you're killing the patient as well. You see where technology is taking us, where plastic garbage is ruining whole rivers and oceans. And because the parliaments and congresses are bribed by industrial deep pockets to be silent about the mess that industries leave behind, the legislatures are not doing very much, if anything, to stop the proliferation of plastic pollution, fluoride pollution, and the heavy metals coming down on us from the skies and ruining the soil. No, Congress and Parliament aren't doing anything to stem or stop the onslaught and the conquest by just business, which goes all the way to what is taught in our schools to our children. Our children are taught they can be anything they can contrive in their minds. They can do whatever they want to do. And yes, they have to face the consequences, but the Common Core curriculum does not teach heuristics, does not teach ethics, does not teach causes and effects. in human behavior, so the children are left to their own devices without any cosmic wisdom. You see what the parade toward worldwide empire where it has led us. And it's led us away from accountability for our behavior, which is what the Bible brought to the world, and the teachings of Jesus, accountability for our behavior. There's even a way in the Bible to finance a community, and everything you need. The way to finance is in here, okay? The way to be happy is in here, okay? The way to thrive is in here, and it's in community. It does not work out very well for individuals who are isolated and dispersed in an empire. But you already know this. You're already experiencing the isolation and the dispersion, so that every little domicile, every apartment, every little house is isolated and set off from every other family. Every family is competing against every other family. Every worker is competing against every other worker. And you wonder, okay, why the news is full of violence, and 45,000 people a year commit suicide in the United States alone. 45,000 people off themselves every year, because life is absurd where there's no place to make human connections. And the empire, the new world order, I call it, is designed and set up to isolate every individual by the mark of the beast, whether it's an implant in your hand or whether it's just what you're thinking about all the time. Money, 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 which is all that the empire has to give to anybody. Money, position, and power, which is not the same as relationship. It's not the same as caring. It's not the same as well-being. It's not the same as a wholesome life. It's not the same as fun. What the empire gives us is distractions to keep us from looking at our past to find out how we got here. And that's what this podcast is designed to do today, to look at how we got here and what are we going to do about it. Because the relentless onslaught of the Illuminati agenda is still before us. And I will put also in this whole list of references your copy of the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion, which was first published during the 18th century, during the time when the Anabaptists were breaking off from the European hegemony in the Catholic Church, okay? And the Masons and the Zionists and the ideologues who wanted the empire industrial organization of the world, okay? They put together their playbook, how they were going to take the good people, the little people, the innocent people, the honest people down. And it's exactly what they've done. It's exactly what they've done. And now with the social media censoring people who point this stuff out, I was deplatformed on YouTube. I had 2,880 subscribers one day, and the next day I was down to 0, and I couldn't use my name. And so now I have about 60 subscribers. You know, we do a lot of work to present the truth about our history to people, and it gets buried. And that's what they intend to keep doing, is burying, shadow banning, and deplatforming people who don't want to experience the empire again, who don't want pedophilia, pederasty, human trafficking, slavery, transhumanism, prolific sexual orientations and mercenary business practices, gun running, drug running, and serial wars. We just don't want it. And so we object and we protest. And that's what we do every day. And that's what I've done every day since I was radicalized by George Herbert Walker Bush. And I don't know if he would ever, well, he's gone now, but I met up with George Herbert Walker Bush in 2001 to 2004 at New York Times. New York Times had a forum called a Buzz, A-B-U-Z-Z. And I used to run into George Herbert Walker Bush there with his doppelganger, Bruce D. And he used to like to spout and pontificate there. And I saved everything he said because he was so arrogant. And he's the one who taught me that the New World Order was not about anything decent or friendly or truthful. So that's why I'm making this podcast today. And thank you for patiently putting up with this litany. But I'm pulling this together for the book that will document what I have said today. And having it all in a line in my head makes it a lot easier to do the book. You know, I have about 30 books at Amazon. So this is the book I'm working on. And thank you for coming by and paying attention and noticing what's happening is not in accord with our wishes. And so this has been Emily Craig, or as my sacred name goes, Shekiah. And thank you so much, and we'll see you. Bye-bye.